I'm Sandra, 31 female. I work as a librarian, and my life has always found its comfort in the quiet order of things, the Dewey Decimal System, the hushed rustle of turning pages, the predictable arc of a well-told story. I live in a small but cozy apartment that I've filled with second-hand books and thriving plants. But the story I'm about to tell you is anything but orderly. It's a messy, painful chronicle of how the man I loved tried to erase me, and how the family I trusted held the door open for him while he did it. This is the story of how their betrayal was brought into the light by the one person I never expected to help me, my ex. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Our life, to an outsider, was perfect. Mark was a financial advisor, a profession that came with a built-in air of respectability and success. He was handsome in that clean-cut, trustworthy way that mothers adore, and mine was no exception. When I first brought him home, my mother, Helen, a retired teacher who judged everything and everyone against a rigid rubric of her own design, gave him her highest marks. "He's a provider, Sandra," she'd said, her voice filled with a satisfaction that implied I had finally passed a long-overdue exam. "A man with a plan, you're lucky to have found him." My younger brother, David, a software engineer who viewed the world in binary code, agreed. "His investment portfolio is solid. He's logical. It's a good match," he'd concluded after a 20-minute conversation about stock options. They saw his success, his confidence, his impeccable manners, and they saw him as the solution to my perceived shortcomings. My quiet nature, my modest career, my preference for a night with a book over a loud social gathering. We lived in a beautiful two-story house in a suburban neighborhood with manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. Mark called it our forever home, but over time it began to feel more like a gilded cage. The bars were subtle at first. They were forged from comments disguised as care. "You know, that dress is a little simple, honey. Let me buy you something that shows you off better," he'd say, steering me toward expensive boutiques where he would pick out clothes that felt more like costumes. He'd help me manage my finances, consolidating my accounts with his until I no longer had a debit card that was solely my own. "It's just easier this way, for budgeting," he'd explained with a patient smile that made me feel foolish for questioning it. My car, an older but reliable sedan, was sold because he insisted we share his luxury SUV. "It's safer, Sandra. I just want you to be safe." My world began to shrink, one seemingly logical decision at a time. My friends, who Mark found a bit loud or unambitious, were gradually phased out. Invitations would get lost, or Mark would plan a surprise weekend getaway on the same days I was meant to see them. He'd sigh dramatically when I'd bring them up. "Don't you think we're a bit beyond girls' nights, sweetheart? We're building a future." Eventually, the calls and texts from my friends dwindled, replaced by the suffocating silence of our perfect home. He had an explanation for everything, a rationalization that painted him as the protector and me as the person who needed protecting. He wasn't isolating me, he was elevating our life. He wasn't controlling me, he was guiding me. My family saw none of this. They saw the beautiful house, the expensive gifts he lavished upon me, and the charming man who always remembered my mother's birthday and talked about the stock market with my brother. When I tried to voice a small concern, it was immediately dismissed. I once mentioned to my mother that I felt a little suffocated, that Mark made all the decisions. Her response was swift and sharp. "It's called being a man, Sandra. He's taking the lead." Most women would kill for a man who cares that much. Don't create problems where there are none. She had spent her life teaching children to think critically, yet she refused to look beyond the pristine surface of my life. David was even less helpful. "What's the logical issue here?" he'd ask, tapping his fingers on his phone. "Is he hurting you? Is he mismanaging the funds? If not, it sounds like an emotional response, not a data-driven one. You tend to be overly sensitive." To him, my feelings were bugs in the code, insignificant errors in an otherwise perfectly functioning system. My fear wasn't quantifiable, so it wasn't real. The whispers of my own intuition grew louder in the silence of my gilded cage. Mark's control wasn't just about finances or my social life. It was about me. He started correcting the way I told stories at family dinners, laughing it off as, "She always exaggerates, bless her heart." He would belittle my job. "It's cute that you have your little library hobby," he'd say in front of others. "It keeps you busy." Each comment was a small chip at the foundation of my identity. I started to doubt my own perceptions, my own memories. Was I being dramatic? Was I overly sensitive? My family's dismissals echoed in my head, reinforcing Mark's narrative. The worst part was the quiet tension that permeated the house when we were alone. The charming smile he wore for the world would vanish the moment the front door closed. It was replaced by a tight-lipped impatience. If I left a cup on the counter, he wouldn't yell. He would just stand there, staring at it, until I scrambled to put it in the dishwasher, my heart pounding with a nameless dread. He'd check the mileage on the car, asking for an explanation for every trip. He'd go through my phone at night while I pretended to be asleep, my body rigid with fear. It was a campaign of psychological warfare, and I was losing. I was a prisoner in a home my family saw as a palace, shackled to a man they saw as a prince. The cage was beautiful, the bars were invisible to everyone but me, and the whispers telling me I was in danger were being drowned out by a chorus of voices telling me I was lucky. The shift from psychological control to outright abuse wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, creeping tide of venom. The invisible bars of my cage began to feel cold and hard against my skin. The first time Mark laid a hand on me, it was almost dismissible, a masterpiece of plausible deniability. We were arguing about something trivial. I had forgotten to pick up his favorite brand of coffee. His voice, which had been low and menacing, suddenly stopped. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh with a strength that stole my breath. "Do you ever listen, Sandra? Or is your head just filled with useless stories?" He hissed, his face inches from mine. He held me there for a long moment, his eyes cold and empty, before shoving me away. I stumbled back against the kitchen counter, a bloom of purple already forming on my bicep. The next morning, he apologized profusely, caressing the bruise with a gentle thumb. "I am so sorry, baby. I've been under so much pressure at work. It will never, ever happen again." And like a fool, I wanted to believe him. But it did happen again. The incidents became more frequent, always followed by a cycle of remorse, lavish gifts, and whispered promises. The control tightened. He demanded I quit my job at the library. "I make more than enough for both of us," he'd said, framing it as a generous offer. "You shouldn't have to work. You can focus on the house on us." When I hesitated, his anger flared. It was a quiet, terrifying anger that simmered just below the surface. He didn't have to shout to make me afraid. A look, a tightening of his jaw, was enough. I resigned the following week, cutting off my last remaining lifeline to the outside world, my last shred of independence. That's when I began my desperate, futile campaign to make my family listen. My first call was to my mother. I waited until Mark was at a work dinner, my hands trembling as I dialed her number. "Mom," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "Things are not good here, with Mark." "What do you mean, not good?" she asked, her tone already defensive, as if I were personally attacking her judgment. I tried to explain the incident in the kitchen, the constant surveillance, the way he spoke to me. I told her I was scared. Her response was a cold wave of disappointment. "Sandra, you are being hysterical. All couples have arguments. You pushed him, he pushed back. You need to learn how to de-escalate these things. You always had a flair for the dramatic. You finally have a stable, successful man, and you're trying to sabotage it because you're bored. Go and apologize to him for whatever you did to set him off." I hung up the phone, a hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was an accusation. In her eyes, I was the problem. My next attempt was with David. I sent him a long, carefully worded text message outlining Mark's increasingly erratic behavior. I detailed how he had taken my bank cards and given me a weekly allowance in cash. I told him Mark had installed a tracking app on my phone for my safety. I thought the cold, hard data of control would appeal to his logical mind. His reply came 3 hours later. Sounds like he's just being security conscious. A lot of couples share finances. You're reading malice into standard relationship protocols. Unless you have empirical evidence of physical harm, this is just an emotional issue. Stop overthinking it. Empirical evidence. Like the bruise on my arm wasn't real. Like the terror that kept me awake at night was just a glitch in my system. I texted him a picture of a handprint-shaped bruise on my wrist from when Mark had grabbed me for being on the phone too long. David's reply was instant and infuriating. I'm S. There's context to that. Don't send me things like this, Sandra. It's manipulative. The chorus of silence was deafening. My family wasn't just ignoring my pleas, they were actively siding with my abuser. They were reinforcing his narrative that I was the unstable one. I started to wonder if they were right. Was I crazy? Was this normal? His voice and their voices blended into one, a constant loop of gaslighting that wore down my sanity. The climax of their betrayal came on a cold Tuesday night. Mark had flown into a rage because I'd had a brief, friendly chat with a male neighbor while getting the mail. He accused me of embarrassing him, of being disloyal. He backed me into a corner in our living room, his body tense with rage. He didn't hit me with his fist. He threw a heavy glass paperweight at the wall just beside my head. It shattered, sending shards of glass flying. I sank to the floor, shaking uncontrollably as he stood over me. "This is what happens when you disrespect me," he said calmly, before turning and walking out of the room. That was the moment I knew I had to leave or I would die in that house. While he was in the shower, I grabbed my purse and my keys and ran out the front door. I didn't take anything else. I just ran. I drove to a gas station a few miles away and called my mother from a payphone, my voice cracking with terror. "Mom," he threw something at my head. I had to run out. "Please, can I just come stay for one night? Just one night, please." I was sobbing, begging. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the television in the background. Then her voice came, colder than I had ever heard it. "Sandra, I am not getting involved in your marital spats. You are a grown woman. Go home, talk to your husband, and work it out. Do not call me with this kind of nonsense again." She hung up. Desperate, I called David. He answered on the second ring. I didn't even have to explain the whole story. The panic in my voice was obvious. "David, please, I'm at a gas station. I can't go home. Can I please just sleep on your couch?" "I have an early meeting, Sandra. I can't. And honestly, you need to stop this. You're just trying to get attention. You made your bed with Mark, now lie in it." He hung up before I could even reply. I stood there in the cold, holding the dead receiver, the reality of my situation crashing down on me. It wasn't just Mark I needed to escape. It was my entire family. They had heard my screams and covered their ears. They had seen my bruises and called them manipulative. They had received my desperate pleas and labeled them dramatic. I was utterly and completely alone, abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love me. The silence from their phones was the most violent sound I had ever heard. The click of the phone receiver falling back into its cradle was a sound of absolute finality. It was the sound of doors slamming shut, of bridges being burned not by me, but by the very people I had been crawling towards for safety. I stood in the harsh fluorescent light of the gas station, the smell of gasoline and stale coffee filling my lungs, and a terrifying clarity washed over me. No one was coming. No one was going to save me. My family had made their choice, and their choice was Mark. Or rather, their choice was the comfortable, unproblematic illusion Mark provided. I was the bug in the code, the drama in the narrative, the inconvenient truth that threatened to disrupt their peaceful lives. My first instinct was panic. It rose in my chest like a toxic bile, hot and suffocating. Where do I go? What do I do? Every nerve in my body screamed to go back, to crawl into the house and apologize to Mark for running, for making a scene, for existing. It would be easier. The thought was a siren's call, promising a return to a familiar, albeit painful, reality. But the image of the shattered glass on the wall, sparkling like deadly confetti next to where my head had been, was a powerful anchor. I couldn't go back. Going back was a death sentence, whether it came quickly or was delivered over 1,000 more days of quiet terror. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my car keys. I had a little over $40 in cash in my wallet and a quarter tank of gas. My phone, the one Mark tracked, was still in my purse. I powered it down, the screen going black like a closing eye. It felt like severing a limb. For years, that device had been my only connection to the outside world, and now it was a liability, a digital leash. I drove away from the gas station with no destination in mind. My world shrunk to the twin beams of my headlights cutting through the darkness. The roads were empty. Each passing street sign was a reminder of a life that was no longer mine. The park where Mark and I had our first picnic. The cinema where he'd first held my hand. The memories were tainted now, poisoned by the knowledge of what lay beneath the surface. After an 8-hour of aimless driving, the exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't think straight. I remembered seeing a sign for a women's shelter during a library outreach program years ago. I had packed brochures for it, never once imagining I would be the one needing it. Finding it felt like a dream. I pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of an unassuming brick building. It took every ounce of courage I had left to get out of the car and walk to the door. A woman with tired, kind eyes let me in. The shelter was clean and quiet, filled with a sense of weary solidarity. I was given a cup of tea, a warm blanket, and a cot in a room with 3 other women. I didn't speak to any of them. I couldn't. The words were trapped in my throat, choked by shame and grief. I lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of strangers breathing around me. This was the empty echo of my family's rejection. The space they had left in my life was now filled with the profound emptiness of a shelter, a place for the discarded and the forgotten. I cried silently, not for Mark, but for the mother who chose convenience over her daughter, and for the brother who chose logic over love. They had left me homeless in more ways than one. They had evicted me from the very idea of family. The next few weeks were a blur of survival. The shelter helped me get a temporary restraining order against Mark. They connected me with a legal aid lawyer and a counselor. The process was humiliating and exhausting. I had to recount every detail of Mark's abuse to strangers, my voice clinical and detached as I listed the incidents. It felt like I was talking about someone else, a character in a sad book I'd once read. The hardest part was having no one to call afterwards, no one to cry with, no one to tell me I was brave. The echo of my family's silence followed me everywhere. I found a new job at a small, independent bookstore. It wasn't the library, but it was close enough. Being surrounded by books again was a balm to my soul. I rented a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat, using the first paycheck and a small grant from a victim's support fund for the deposit. It was a stark contrast to the spacious, elegant house I had shared with Mark, but it was mine. Every mismatched piece of thrift store furniture, every chipped plate, was a symbol of my freedom. I bought a cheap, prepaid phone and gave the number to no one but my lawyer and my new boss. I didn't hear from my family. Not a call, not a text, not an email. It was as if I had ceased to exist. I later learned from a sympathetic cousin that my mother had told the entire extended family that I had had a nervous breakdown and had run off, leaving poor, devoted Mark heartbroken. She had painted me as the villain, the unstable wife who couldn't handle the pressures of a committed relationship. She wasn't just silent, she was actively erasing my truth and replacing it with a more palatable fiction. David, my cousin said, simply told everyone he was staying out of it, a cowardly neutrality that was, in itself, a form of condemnation. The echo in my life was no longer empty. It was filled with the carefully constructed lies of my own family. The isolation was complete. I was a ghost in my own life story, haunting the periphery while they continued on, their perfect family picture only slightly marred by my conspicuous absence. 6 months passed, 6 months of rebuilding my life from the ground up, one fragile brick at a time. I was working at the bookstore, finding solace in the scent of old paper and the quiet companionship of fellow book lovers. I had my small apartment, my independence, and a tentative, budding sense of peace. The terror of Mark had faded to a dull, persistent ache. The raw wound of my family's betrayal had scabbed over into a hard, protective scar. I was surviving. I had even started to believe I might one day thrive. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my cheap prepaid phone buzzed with an unknown number. My heart leaped into my throat. My first thought was that it was Mark, that he had somehow found me. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct told me this was different. I stepped into the bookstore's back office and answered with a trembling, "Hello." "Is this Sandra Peterson?" a calm, professional voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Detective Isabella Rossi. I'm with the city's Financial Crimes Unit. I'm calling in regards to Mark Tanner." The sound of his name was like a punch to the gut. I leaned against a shelf of overstock books, my knees suddenly weak. Is something wrong?" I stammered, my mind racing through a dozen horrible possibilities. Had he hurt someone else? Was he coming after me? "Mr. Tanner was arrested 2 weeks ago, ma'am," Detective Rossi said, her tone even and measured. "On multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. It seems your ex-boyfriend was running a rather sophisticated Ponzi scheme, DEFRA, using his clients out of millions of dollars." I was speechless. Fraud, embezzlement. I had known he was controlling, manipulative, and violent, but I had never suspected he was a high-level criminal. It was a shocking reminder of how little I truly knew the man I had lived with for 4 years. The beautiful house, the luxury car, the expensive gifts, it had all been a lie, funded by stolen money. The gilded cage had been built on a foundation of deceit. "We've been building a case against him for months," Detective Rossi continued. "The evidence is overwhelming. He's facing a significant prison sentence. His lawyer approached the DA's office last week to discuss a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Mr. Tanner has agreed to full cooperation. That includes surrendering all of his personal electronics, laptops, hard drives, and his primary mobile phone to aid in our investigation of his co-conspirators." I listened, unsure of why she was telling me all this. It was a relief to know he was behind bars, that he couldn't hurt me anymore, but it felt distant, like a story on the evening news. "Ma'am," Detective Rossi said, her voice softening slightly, "the reason I'm calling you is because of the restraining order you have against him. Standard procedure requires us to notify you of his incarceration. But there's something else. As part of our digital forensics, we have to create a complete archive of his devices. In reviewing the communications on his phone, we came across the text message threads between you and your family from the night you left him." My blood ran cold. Those texts, my desperate, pleading messages sent into the void, my mother's cold dismissal, my brother's clinical rejection. "I also saw the messages he exchanged with them after you left," she said carefully. "The ones where they apologized to him for your behavior and assured him you would come to your senses. We also found the thread where your mother, Helen, helped him construct the narrative that you were mentally unstable for the rest of the family." I had to sit down. I sank onto a stack of bundled newspapers, the phone pressed hard against my ear. I knew it had happened, but hearing it confirmed by a third party, a police detective, made it terrifyingly real. It wasn't just my perception. It wasn't my drama. It was a documented fact, logged and time-stamped in the cold, unfeeling memory of a smartphone. "Legally," Detective Rossi explained, "those communications fall under the umbrella of evidence related to your domestic abuse case, as they establish a pattern of isolation and a lack of a support system, which is a key element abusers exploit. Mark's plea deal means he has waived his right to privacy concerning all data on that phone. If you and your lawyer want it, the prosecution can release a certified copy of those specific message threads to you." It's an unusual situation, but given the circumstances, the DA has already approved it. An unexpected gift, that's what she was handing me. Mark, in his selfish attempt to save his own skin, had inadvertently armed me with the one thing I never had: undeniable proof. He had meticulously documented my family's betrayal. He had saved every cowardly, cruel, and dismissive word they had ever sent. For months, their story, that I was the crazy one, the liar, the problem, had been the only one told. They had silenced me and rewritten my history. But now, their own words, preserved in digital amber, were about to be handed to me. I thought of my mother's smug certainty, my brother's condescending logic. I thought of the lies they had spread, the way they had so easily discarded me to maintain their comfortable lives. A new feeling began to bubble up through the shock and the pain, a slow, burning fire. It wasn't just about closure anymore. It was about justice. "Yes," I said to Detective Rossi, my voice shaking but clear. "Yes, I want them. Please send them to my lawyer." In his final act of self-preservation, Mark had given me the keys to the cage I never knew I was still in, the cage built by my family's lies. And I was about to use them. A week later, an email from my legal aid lawyer appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simple: requested documentation. Attached was a single, password-protected PDF file. My heart hammered against my ribs. Inside that file was the unopened archive, the complete, unvarnished transcript of my family's betrayal. It was the empirical evidence my brother had demanded, the objective truth my mother had denied. It was everything, and I was terrified of it. For 3 days, the file sat on my laptop's desktop, a small, menacing icon. I would open my computer to check work emails or pay a bill, and my eyes would immediately be drawn to it. I'd hover my cursor over the file, my finger trembling, but I couldn't bring myself to click. It felt like volunteering to walk back into a burning building. I had survived the fire. Why would I? Want to feel the heat again? I had spent the last 6 months trying to heal, to build a life on the foundation of my own truth. What if seeing their words, in stark black and white, shattered the fragile peace I had built? My counselor had told me that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about integrating the truth of what happened into my story without letting it define me. But this felt different. This was a choice. I could leave the archive sealed, let the ghosts of those conversations remain as memories, softened and blurred by time. Or I could open it and face them head-on, knowing that the pain would be sharp and immediate. On the 4th night, I couldn't sleep. I got out of bed, made a cup of chamomile tea, and sat in front of my laptop. The silence of my small apartment felt heavy, expectant. I knew I couldn't move forward with this digital ghost haunting me. I needed to know. I needed to see the words that had condemned me to a night in a shelter, to months of loneliness. I typed in the password my lawyer had sent. The file opened. The document was cold and clinical, formatted like a court exhibit. It was a chronological log of text messages, stripped of emojis and chat bubbles, leaving only the raw, time-stamped words. I started with the thread between my mother and me on the night I escaped. My messages were frantic, filled with typos, begging for help. "Mom, please answer. He threw something at me. I'm scared. Can I just stay for one night? Please, Mom, I am begging you." Her replies were even colder than I remembered. "Sandra, you need to stop this. You are creating a scene over nothing. Mark is a good man. You are lucky to have him. Do not throw that away over a simple argument. Go home and be a wife to your husband. I am not discussing this further." Reading them felt like being slapped. There was no concern, no love, only annoyance and a chillingly firm command to return to my abuser. Then I scrolled to the messages between my mother and Mark, sent just minutes after she had hung up on me. "Helen, Mark, Sandra just called me in a complete state. I am so sorry. She can be so dramatic." "Mark, it's okay, Helen. She just gets worked up. We had a small disagreement and she overreacted." "Helen, I told her to come home and apologize to you. I hope she listens. We are just so thrilled to have you in the family, and I won't let her foolishness ruin that." My breath hitched. She had apologized to him. She had actively conspired with him against her own daughter, coaching him, reassuring him. She was more concerned with keeping her perfect son-in-law than with keeping her child safe. The exchanges with my brother David were just as devastating, but in a different way. My texts to him were a desperate appeal to logic. "David, he's tracking my phone. He controls all the money. This isn't normal. He threw a glass paperweight at my head. I ran out. I have nowhere to go." His replies were a masterclass in detached cruelty. "David, you're being emotional. there is no data to support the conclusion that you are in physical danger. Sandra, the data is the giant hole in the wall next to my head. David, an outlier event, not a pattern, go home. I have a project deadline and cannot be distracted by this. And then his text to Mark, sent less than an hour later. David, hey Mark, sorry about Sandra. She gets into these emotional spirals. Let me know if you need anything. Don't let her get to you. Don't let her get to you. My own brother, treating my terror as an inconvenience to my abuser. I spent hours reading through the archive. I saw the messages where my family discussed my breakdown with aunts and uncles, solidifying the lie. I saw them making plans with Mark for holidays I wasn't invited to. I saw them reassuring him, comforting him, choosing him over and over and over again. Each word was a fresh cut. By the time I reached the end of the document, the sun was beginning to rise. The anger I had felt when Detective Rossi first called had cooled into something harder, something more resolute. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about a fundamental failure of humanity. My plan had been nebulous before. Maybe I would just disappear from their lives forever. But now, seeing the calculated, collaborative nature of their deception, I knew that silence wasn't enough. My silence was what they had counted on all along. I closed the laptop, the images of their words seared into my brain. The plan forming in my mind wasn't about screaming or revenge in the traditional sense. It wasn't about destroying them. It was about reflection. I was going to make them look in the mirror. I was going to hold up their own words to their faces and force them, for once, to see the truth of what they had done, stripped of all their self-serving justifications. I was going to give them the one thing they had so callously denied me, a confrontation with reality. The unopened archive was now open, and it had given me a new, terrible kind of clarity. 2 weeks later, I set my plan in motion. It was a plan born not of rage, but of a cold, clear-eyed resolve. I sent a simple, concise email to my mother and brother. The subject was dinner. The body of the email was brief. I would like to meet for dinner to talk. I will make a reservation for the 3 of us at the Grove next Saturday at 7 p.m. It is important that you both are there. I chose the Grove because it was a neutral territory, a quiet, upscale restaurant with private dining rooms that my mother favored for special occasions. It was the kind of place where decorum was expected, where raising one's voice would be a cardinal sin. This was not going to be a screaming match. It was going to be a dissection, and I needed a sterile environment. Their replies came quickly. My mother S. was dripping with condescending relief. Of course, Sandra, I knew you would eventually come to your senses. We are looking forward to helping you get back on your feet. My brother S. was more succinct. Confirmed. They thought I was crawling back, broken and ready to be fixed, ready to be molded back into the family narrative. They had no idea they were walking into a final exam for which they had not studied. I spent the week preparing. I took the PDF of the text messages and formatted them into a simple, clean slideshow presentation. No dramatic music, no fancy transitions, just black screens with their own words in white text, time-stamped and attributed. I loaded the presentation onto a small, portable projector I'd bought online. It felt surreal, like preparing for a board meeting where the topic was the complete and utter collapse of my family. On Saturday evening, I arrived at the restaurant 20 minutes early. I had booked the Vinifera room, a small, soundproofed space with a long mahogany table and a single blank wall. I set up the projector at one end of the table, aimed it at the wall, and waited. I felt strangely calm, the way a person does after a long fever has finally broken. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound and heavy certainty. They arrived together, a united front. My mother, Helen, was dressed in a crisp, cream-colored pantsuit, her armor of respectability. David looked uncomfortable in a collared shirt, already glancing at his watch. "Sandra, dear," my mother began, moving to hug me. I took a half-step back and her arms fell awkwardly to her sides. "You look thin. We've been so worried." "Have you?" I asked, my voice even. "Please sit." They took their seats, a flicker of confusion in their eyes. The waiter came to take our drink orders. I ordered a sparkling water. They ordered wine. So, Helen said, placing her napkin in her lap, ready to take control. Let's talk about what's next. We can help you find a proper therapist, and I'm sure if you just talk to Mark. We're not here to talk about my future, I interrupted quietly. We're here to talk about the past. Before they could respond, I reached over and turned on the projector. The beam of light hit the wall and the first slide appeared. It was my text to my mother. 7:14 p.m. Mom, please answer. He threw something at me. I'm scared. Helen's breath caught. David shifted in his seat. What is this? My mother whispered, her face paling. This, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand, is a record. A gift, in a way, from Mark. His plea deal came with his phone records. I clicked to the next slide. Her reply. 7:16 p.m. Sandra, you need to stop this. You are creating a scene over nothing. I didn't say a word. I just let her words hang in the air between us. I clicked again. 7:18 p.m. Can I just stay for one night? 7:19 p.m. Please, Mom, I am begging you. 7:22 p.m. Go home and be a wife to your husband. I am not discussing this further. I turned to look at my mother. Her face, which had been a mask of maternal concern moments before, was crumbling. The cream-colored suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume. But you were being hysterical, she stammered, her eyes darting between me and the screen. I didn't know. Didn't know? I asked, the first crack appearing in my calm facade. I told you I was scared. I told you he hurt me. What more did you need to know? I turned my attention to David. The next slide was for him. 7:31 p.m. David, he's tracking my phone. He controls all the money. This isn't normal. 7:35 p.m. He threw a glass paperweight at my head. I ran out. I have nowhere to go. David stared at the screen, his face impassive, but a muscle was twitching in his jaw. Then his reply appeared. 10:42 p.m. You're being emotional. There is no data to support the conclusion that you are in physical danger. 10:42 p.m. An outlier event. Not a pattern. Go home. I have a project deadline and cannot be distracted by this. An outlier event, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. That's what you called it, a distraction from your project. I looked at my brother. The person who I used to build forts with, the person who was supposed to be my partner in crime. Was I just bad data to you, David? An error message you could just close and ignore? He wouldn't look at me. He stared at his water glass as if it held the secrets of the universe. The final act was the cruelest. I showed them their texts to Mark, my mother's apology to him for my behavior, my brother's casual, "Don't let her get to you." The room was utterly silent, save for the low hum of the projector fan. The air was thick with the truth they could no longer deny, dismiss, or reframe. You didn't just ignore me, I said, my voice low and final. You actively chose him. You consoled my abuser. You helped him create a story to tell the rest of the world that I was crazy. You didn't just fail to protect me. You participated. My mother finally broke. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. We made a mistake, she sobbed. We didn't understand. We're so sorry, Sandra. Please, we can fix this. David looked up, his eyes filled with a dawning horror, the look of a programmer who has just realized the bug he ignored has crashed the entire system. She's right, he said, his voice hoarse. There's no excuse. We were wrong. I looked at their faces, one contorted by performative grief, the other by a cold, logical shame. Their apologies, their admissions of guilt, they were 6 months too late. They were a currency that no longer had any value. The waiter returned to take our food order and then backed away slowly, sensing the frigid atmosphere in the room. A table set for truth had become awake, and they were finally mourning a relationship they had killed themselves. The apologies, once they started, came in a torrent. They were desperate, clumsy, and transparently self-serving. They were the words of people who had been caught, not people who had arrived at remorse on their own. "I'm your mother, Sandra," Helen cried, reaching a hand across the table which I ignored. I love you. I just wanted what was best for you, and Mark seemed so perfect. I couldn't see it. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Her pleas were for her own absolution, an attempt to repair the pristine image she had of herself as a good mother. She was mourning the loss of her own self-perception more than she was mourning my pain. David's apology was characteristically more analytical. My threat assessment was flawed, he said, as if describing a software failure. I misinterpreted the data. I failed to account for emotional variables. My response was inadequate and caused significant harm. I apologize for my error. He had processed the new information and acknowledged his mistake, but his words were devoid of the one thing that might have mattered: heart. He was sorry he'd gotten the answer wrong, not that he'd shattered his sister. I let them talk, letting their excuses and explanations fill the sterile air of the private room. They talked about the pressure to keep up appearances, about how convincing Mark had been, about how they thought they were helping me by encouraging me to try harder in my marriage. Each word was another shovel of dirt on the grave of the relationship we once had. When they finally fell silent, their eyes were fixed on me, hopeful and terrified, waiting for my verdict. They expected me to offer forgiveness, to allow us all to move forward, to sweep this ugliness under the rug as we had with every other uncomfortable family truth. They expected me to do what I had always done: play the part of the peacemaker. I took a sip of my water, the silence stretching uncomfortably. Then I turned off the projector. The room plunged back into the soft, ambient lighting of the restaurant, but the shadows felt deeper now. "I hear your apologies," I said, my voice calm and devoid of the emotion they were expecting. "And I have a response, but it's not a negotiation, it's a notification." I looked at my mother. "You say you love me, but the love of a mother is supposed to be a safe harbor. When I was drowning, you told me to swim back to the storm because you didn't want to get your feet wet. Your love comes with conditions I am no longer willing to meet. The primary condition is that my reality never inconveniences yours." I then turned to David. "You say you made an error. An error is a typo in a line of code. Leaving your sister to fend for herself against a violent man because you couldn't be distracted is not an error. It's a choice. It's a catastrophic moral failure. You pride yourself on logic, but you lack the most basic human algorithm: empathy." A single tear finally traced a path down my cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. The Sandra you knew, the one who would have accepted your apologies and pretended this never happened for the sake of family, died 6 months ago in a gas station parking lot. She died when she realized that the people who were supposed to be her safety net were actually a part of the cage. I mourned her, and I mourned you. I did my grieving in a homeless shelter, in a therapist's office, and in the lonely silence of my tiny apartment. I am done grieving now. I stood up, placing my napkin neatly on the table. This dinner, this presentation, it wasn't for you. It wasn't an invitation to fix things. It was for me. It was so I could say my final piece and know that you heard it, that you saw the proof of it with your own eyes. It was my chance to close the book. Helen started sobbing openly now, a raw, ugly sound. "Sandra, no, don't do this. Don't throw your family away." "I'm not throwing my family away," I said, looking at her and then at my brother, whose face was a mask of stunned disbelief. "You threw me away first. I'm just finally letting go of the rope." I walked out of the room, leaving them with the bill, the empty screen, and the echo of their own words. I didn't look back. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I didn't feel the triumphant thrill of revenge I might have expected. I felt a profound, aching quiet. It was the sound of burning bridges, a sound that is both destructive and liberating. My life now is small, and it is quiet, but it is authentically mine. I have my bookstore, my books, and a small circle of friends who have become my real family, people who check in on me, who listen, who showed me kindness when I needed it most. The scars from Mark and my family will likely never fade completely, but they are no longer open wounds. They are a part of my story, a reminder of the fire I walked through. I am no longer a character in someone else's narrative. I am the author of my own, And this chapter, the one filled with pain and betrayal, is finally over. And the next one is all mine to write.